Hi, my name is Stefan Georgi. I'm here with Dr. Jason Pape of the Northport Wellness Center in Northport, New York. Today we want to talk about peak performance, and particularly we're going to talk about how peak performance is related to your brain and how you've got more than just physical aspects going on when you want to reach your maximum potential. Dr. Pape is with the BrainCore New York group. They offer neurofeedback training, which is something that can really help to wire your brain in a way that can improve focus and clarity and really assist you in thriving in some of these more high performance situations. So Dr. Pape, if you want to I guess introduce yourself for a second and maybe go ahead and explain how neurofeedback in general works, since that's kind of what we're talking about in respects to peak performance. How that's related. The brain is related, I guess, to the performance and how neurofeedback helps that.
Sure. Well, first, again, I'm Dr. Jason Pape. I'm a chiropractor. My postgraduate degree is both in sports medicine as well as pediatrics and neurosensory. So this is one of my wheelhouses. I do a lot of neurosensory integration, which I'll talk about a little bit more as we go in there, and how that affects the peak performance both in the classroom or in life as well as in sports. But in general, people sometimes think just because there's no issue that neurofeedback and working on their brain is not necessarily something we should focus on. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things we can still do that people don't realize is out there, and that's kind of where the neurofeedback comes in when it comes to the peak performance, if you will. So, not everyone has a perfect brain. No one really does. So, you don't have to have an issue like an ADHD or anxiety to benefit from this, because, like you said, there are peak performance options.
Okay.
Some people are better visual learners than they are auditory learners, as an example. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means that your visual system may integrate better than your auditory system. There's ways you can improve that to actually make yourself better too. So some of these things we'll do is increase focus, concentration, can help with memory. When it comes to athletics, especially, that can be very important. When we talk about things like solo sports, like golf, things like archery and shooting, anything that requires a lot of concentration, that you want to kind of tune out everything around you and really focus on the task at hand, can be very helpful. And there's a lot of golfers out there, they always want to find a way to increase their game. And one of those things to do is to really help with that focus and concentration and kind of taking out the distractions. Especially as you get further along in your game, because that first 9 holes is one thing, but as you get to that back 9 for a lot of these golfers, that's when the concentration starts to set. And it's about making sure you're really focused, especially on putting greens. So it definitely can be helpful there. And by increasing the way the brain fires, and improving the way the brain fires, I should say, can also help with the motor aspect. So it can actually help with the way your body functions in these situations. So it can help with maybe swing mechanics, keeping your swing clean and tight. It can also help with other sports too. The Italian soccer team, for example, that won the World Cup in 2006, one of the things they used was this mental training room, and neurofeedback was a big piece of that for them. And it was about, improved training, about improved focus, and also in a lot of these sports, it's about forgetting about the mistakes you make. A cornerback in football has got to have a very short memory when it comes to making a mistake. And a lot of times, if you get stuck in that brain space of what we call rumination, where you're thinking about that mistake over and over and over again, and how it may have just cost your team something big, it's going to affect your performance later on. And a lot of us do this in a lot of areas, not just in sports. When you make a mistake somewhere, you go in an interview, maybe you say the wrong thing. Maybe you can be on Google Hangouts and make a mistake. The whole point is you don't want to get focused on that and then get out of your train of thought, and then you just kind of spiral downwards. So this can always help with kind of keep the brain in that better state where you can have I don't want to say it shortens your memory, but it lets you move on from these mistakes and not ruminate and overthink.
Cool. Yeah, well, one thing I'll mention is I played golf. I played 218 hole rounds this weekend, so I would have probably benefited had I done some neurofeedback before, especially for getting some of the mistakes, because you're right, and it's not just in, like you said, not just in sports, but in life in general. It's not a matter of like repressing those memories. It's a matter of having the mental clarity and the focus to keep going and keep pushing forward. And so maybe you could explain a little bit about the specific kind of mechanism behind neurofeedback and how that relates to this peak performance in this brain training?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing people talk about is something called neuroplasticity, and that basically means that the brain is plastic, it can learn. Your neurons you have are not the ones that you'll have forever. They're not all finite, and it's not like you can never learn something again. If it wasn't for neuroplasticity, we'd never learn anything. Right? Anytime you learn a new task, and you memorize something, or you learn a new skill, you've created a pathway in your brain. You basically made a new pathway, or made a better connection of a pathway that already is there. And usually some kind of feedback. We do neurofeedback all day long. Anyone who rides a bike, you learn through neurofeedback, right? You didn't just get on a bike one day and go, right? You had to, you work your way up. You start with the training wheels, and then you work your way up to someone holding on, and they let go, and you might fall off a couple times, and if you keep falling to the right, you learn to lean left. The feedback there is gravity, right? And with repetition, your brain learned how to balance itself on that bike, and it made a new pathway. And once you've done it repetitively, that pathway is permanent. It doesn't go anywhere. That's why I have that saying. It's like riding a bike. You not ride a bike for 20 years. You get on a bike, and a couple pedals in, you're pretty steady on it. So we're using neuroplasticity all the time. You use a remote control on your TV. When you get a new remote, you got to look at it all the time. And then after a while, you don't pay attention. And if you pick up the remote a year or two from now, you might have to look at it once or twice, but then you're right back into it. Math, anything we've done repetitively, will be something that stays with you, and we build upon that. So neurofeedback is just accessing that in a different way. We're using a little different way. We're using EEG and a positive feedback to get your brain to fire a certain way and dysregulate less. So we can encourage it to make new connections and better connections with what's already there in a positive direction.
That's really interesting. So one question, I guess, because I think those are great analogies, both with the bike and math and a lot of these different things. So if I were to come, to the Northport Wellness Center for neurofeedback, is this something that I have to do for the rest of my life, or is it something that because I'm forging those pathways, sort of that I, after a certain amount of time, would really probably not have? Is it a lifelong thing, or is it sort of a shorter-term thing that sort of gives me a skill set for life, I guess is what I'm asking.
The changes you're making will not go away. It's not the kind of thing you come in, you do neurofeedback and BrainCore, and then, a few months later, like, oh, it's all gone. Right. Depending on your goals, it depends how long you need to, do this kind of training. And everyone's a little different, and everyone's brain's a little different, and responds a little quicker or slower depending on who you are. But it's the kind of thing that, yes, once you've gained what you're looking for, you can stop and it's there. Sometimes we recommend some maintenance here and there just because, life happens. Our brains don't sit in a vacuum, if you will. We have little minor chemical or physical traumas that come through that may affect things. I talk about neurofeedback about taking a dirt road and turning it into a superhighway, right? And unless, you might get a pothole here and there, but unless an earthquake comes through, that road's not going anywhere.
Right.
So a little maintenance here and there may be helpful, but it doesn't have to happen. But again, unless there's a physical or chemical trauma, that change isn't going anywhere. Definitely it's a head trauma or some kind of drug overdose, whatever it may be. So it's not the kind of thing you have to do forever. It is repetitive though, and it's not the once or twice kind of thing. You
right.
don't ride a bike one time, and you don't become the star quarterback for the Denver Broncos by throwing the ball once and thinking you're Peyton Manning. So it definitely takes work, but it is the kind of thing that is a finite amount of time. Some people will like to come back for other things or continue to improve.
Right.
You could make it a lifelong thing. Everyone's brain can always continue to benefit, but it's not something you can do forever.
Cool. And let me ask you, follow up on that real quickly then. What are some other conditions and things that people come see you for beyond peak performance, that they find neurofeedback can be helpful for?
We would like more people just come to peak performance, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
People a lot of times don't do much until there's a problem.
Right.
In general, we see a lot of ADD, ADHD, autism, anyone with spectrum disorders, PDD, NOS, anything like that, anxiety, depression, stress, excessive thoughts, chronic fatigue, insomnia, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, tension headaches, chronic migraines, even weight loss and addiction issues can be helpful.
Wow. And the reason that neurofeedback can be so beneficial to all these different conditions, and it is a very diverse array, is because, again, you're focusing on the brain, like where it all comes from. The brain is sort of the command center, so to speak, and it dictates what happens with all these different conditions and based on your brainwave patterns and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct. You nailed it on the head there. And what happens is just, a lot of things happen. If you're in chronic pain all the time, for example, your brain eventually makes a loop. It's not a good loop, but it's there. We can change that.
Right.
Okay? That's almost negative neurofeedback, if you will. Your brain is kind of negatively enforced with things like that too. And we do have negative enforcement in our lives, unfortunately. So it's about rewriting some of those pathways in a lot of these issues.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, this is really interesting. If you want to talk with Dr. Pape about peak performance or any of these other conditions, and specifically using neurofeedback, one place you can get his contact information would be braincoreny.com /the-Northport-Wellness-Center. You probably another website for the Northport Wellness Center, don't you? Or no?
www.northportwellnesscenter.com. And then
maybe even easier to remember than that last one. And then, is there a phone number for the practice you want to give out? People want to call to?
The phone number is 631-262-8505. So 631-262-8505.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, Dr. Pape, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I thought this was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.